The worst example, we've seen agencies that are 70, 80% of all dollars being distributed. And some state unemployment agencies are going to fraudsters and are being stolen. Unfortunately, most of the budgets have something close to 10% of the total budget is leakage. Leakage is just fraud. They're actually baking a very large amount of fraud into every budget. Most fintechs and financial services are 10 basis points, 12 basis points, 15 basis points, right? Not 1,000. One of the biggest mistakes I think that we've made, and certainly I've seen other people make, is like, they're like, do you have this skill set? But what's most important for the people that have been here for a long time and been successful are like, are they really good fit in the organization?
Johnny, welcome to Fintech Leaders. It's a long time coming. I'm glad we're finally sitting down together to record this, albeit remotely, but that's fine. How's it going today?
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It has been a long time coming, and yeah, appreciate you having me on here today.
Johnny, before we started recording, you were telling me a little bit of why getting Socure off the ground took a long time and why it wasn't easy. You took a novel approach. Maybe share a little bit about those initial several years where you had to build these graphs from scratch.
Yeah, so the originating story of Socure was this thesis that, if you go back to like 2011, 2012, all of the social networks, all of the kind of web-based internet properties were totally open ecosystems. They're like, build any app, anything you want on top of us, right? All of the APIs were completely public, very little rate limits, et cetera. And we had this thesis, as graph databases and graph-based analytics continued to evolve, with this theory that, or thesis that you could build kind of all these different versions of Johnny: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Google, About.me, vContacte, Crunchbase, AngelList, et cetera. And, if you looked at these across all of the networks globally, you would know where people grew up, where they went to high school, where they went to college, who their family members were, right? At that time, you could use lots of transitive trust to figure out if these are real people. Fake IDs aren't tagged often in photos. Real people are. And so, yeah, we had this thesis that, 2 billion people globally at the time were on the internet. Credit bureaus were really only in 22, 24 countries. They could only verify 2/3 of the population in those countries. And so we believed, with this kind of graph-based view of all of your different digital identities, plus utilizing traditional data, plus not using rules, but utilizing some new forms of supervised machine learning, we could verify any identity anywhere in the world way better, way more accurate, and in both verifying a larger number of good people, as well as classifying a larger amount of fraud. And yeah, that was a multi-year journey, as a lot of modeling is. It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of kind of stumbling in the dark. And for us, we had an extra challenge, which is in 2014, all of the networks shut off access, and moving from OAuth 1.0 to OAuth 2.0. Yeah, they created an interesting challenge, which is they blocked public access to a lot of the data sets. And yeah, we had to spend most of 2014 into 2015 finding device, geolocation, address, email, phone, all of these elements that we were utilizing to basically match to Miguel's online networks. We then figured these were super predictive as well. And so that was, the early days of Socure, of, having a lot of our early theses, I think, proved right. But, getting a little bit of a curveball as some of our data sets and data sources were cut off. And then, we really found, I like to say, in Q2 2016, we launched V2.5 of our service. And that was really where we found product market fit. And we're pretty much triple, double, in the proverbial sense since then.
What happened in 2014? The networks changed their guidelines.
Yeah. So, Facebook, as one of the largest ones, realized they were competing against their own data on their own ad networks. And so this notion that like basically their data was being utilized and sold back to them. And so, LinkedIn started to kind of limit how they were accessing their API or giving access to their API. So like HR teams could use it in a particular way. They just started throttling the API. So you started to see kind of each folks treat their APIs and data differently. But I don't think I would call it pivot, because we have 12 years later, many of the same approaches around how we use graphs, how we train models, how we do feature engineering. So a lot of the core principles were the same. The problems we were trying to solve, which is how do you say yes to more people than anyone else can? And then how do you classify and predict fraud more accurately than anyone else can? So I wouldn't call it a pivot, but it was certainly a curveball we weren't intending. And, we're very fortunate to have an amazing group of investors that stuck with us during that period where we basically had to go back to the drawing board of the types of data and inputs and features we were utilizing in the model basically were muted overnight. And so, yeah, that I think set the foundation of how Socure thinks about feature engineering and thinks about how data sources may or could change over time. But incredible lesson, and certainly a place where could have meant death for us as a business, but we were able to overcome it. And obviously, I've had a fun ride since then.
It's a similar risk, just on the other side of what people experience also with these networks for what it's called platform risk, right? If you have all your followers on Facebook and then the algorithm changes or you're banned from Facebook, you have no platform, right? For you, it's not exactly that, but essentially the same problem. What are the principles that you established for the data sources that you utilize today to minimize that risk?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a challenge. I'd say we thought a lot about business continuity. We thought a lot about stability. We thought a lot about how we contracted for data. I think we spent a lot of time thinking about how and where we use publicly available information, versus acquired or licensed information. There's a number of strategic things that I think were very, very, very important bets for us. One was, as we thought about kind of control, as we thought about stability, and of course, as we thought about like inferencing and entity resolution, we made a large strategic bet a couple of years ago to basically bring all of our data in-house. And so we get 15, 17 billion rows of data pushed to us a week, tremendous amount of data ingestion that we basically automated. And that allows us to just have a sense of control. That allows us to have a sense of continuity as it relates to the stability of our models, as it relates to the stability of feature engineering, and has been I think a pretty incredible weapon as well for us as we think about economics, as we think about amortization over some of our fixed expenses. I think really thinking about the challenge we faced, the adversity it created for us, and then how do we ensure we don't ever put ourselves in that position again, was something we spent a lot of time and effort and energy kind of thinking through, and has really kind of shaped our version or our view of third-party risk and how we think about partners, how we think about contracting, how we think about hosting and really kind of maintaining that control.
You mentioned back then there were 2 billion users online in this networks. Today, you are actually, I think you've processed 3 billion verified identities. That is still not the entire globe, but it's a big chunk. Could you get to the entire global population?
Yeah, so we really kind of cut our teeth, I like to say initially, in fintech and financial services, and really focused in the US. Really good, I think, Peter Thiel lesson where he talks a lot about small markets. Not that fintech and financial services is a small market, but we were very, very, very focused on who we wanted to serve and how we thought about kind of serving that population, being like very myopically focused around the problems and like what we were being hired to solve. And so, initially when we thought about fintech and financial services, we knew that we wanted to be able to help hard to verify, thin file, credit invisible population say yes more than anyone else. And we knew that in some of these portfolios, some of these businesses, fraud rates were higher than like your traditional financial services. So we really kind of focused on these edges. And then we were like, we're going to focus exclusively in the US, right? 40% of the global TAM. And we're not going to go after every vertical. We're going to be like very focused in these spaces. And so, really over the last 10 years, 12 years, obviously we built a large business that's very well diversified. I think fintech and financial services right now is about half the business. And so over time, we've expanded across many different consumer verticals. I think we operate in about 40 different consumer verticals today. But as we think about global penetration, US being the bread and butter for many years, we see the US population about 4 times a year. And so very large scale, very large amount of adoption where we're seeing the same identities basically over and over and over in the US population. And then today, we service transactions. We're live in over 140 countries. We support about 80 different languages. And so for us, I'd say we're making progress on being able to service that full, 8 billion, if you will, global identities. But historically, the business has really been US focused. And I'd say over the last 2 years, we've really expanded the ability to service multinational, global, US partners as they've expanded internationally.
Johnny, as you have matured as a company builder, as a company leader, let's talk a bit about your philosophy on building. And as you well know, lots of company builders listen to this show, and everyone has their own approach and style. Maybe we can hear about yours, whether you have any strong beliefs about how companies should be built, maybe any pet peeves or anything like that.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things is like really, really be thoughtful on where your strengths are, right? We're all bound by the physics of time, right? We're all limited no matter how hard we work. There's only 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week. And so really being thoughtful on, as you audit your calendar, where are the areas that are like points of decision that only you can make, right? We talk a lot of kind of, military slang or euphemisms internally. And so they talk about like the most decisive point on the battlefield. And so really knowing where, Miguel, you're most valuable to your fund, right? What is the thing that only I can do? What is the thing that's most needle moving in terms of creating shareholder value or solving customer problems? And then really trying to spend a lot of time building a team around you that can do the other things, right? There's the things that you derive joy from. There's the things that you're uniquely great at. And so, that's been a big part of me of like continuously auditing my calendar of like, am I spending the times and the things that like I'm truly world class and that, really only I can do, or where me doing them provides, really outsized gains. As I've thought about, the last 12 years and, if I were to go start this again, there's a lot of writing that comes out of the Valley around people and talent and culture, and it's stuff that I think when you're an early stage, it's like hard to feel, but we're close to 500 people now. And so like you can feel behavioral norms that, in a small 8 or 10 or 12 person team, you can kind of shape that, when it gets to be 400, 500 more, it starts to be, very, very, very much an organism of its own. And so really being thoughtful earlier in the life of the company around the leaders you build underneath you and like really, really, really testing for fit. I think one of the biggest mistakes I think that we've made, and certainly I've seen other people make, is like, they're like, Miguel, do you have this skill set? Are you a great programmer? Are you a great model builder? Are you a great salesperson? Are you a great, storyteller in marketing? But what's most important for the people that have been here for a long time and been successful are like, are they really good fit in the organization? And so, those would be a couple of things that, for me, as I've thought about the business, as I've like reflected upon the people over time that have been here for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 9 years that have been tremendously successful. They just like fit into the culture. They just kind of fit and align with me of like, how we approach problem, how we approach management, how we approach leadership, how we approach, planning and problem solving. And so, yeah, I think fit is a thing that I wish I spent more time on early. And it's something that I spend and we spend a tremendous amount of time on now. And in fact, Amazon has like their bar raiser. We've inserted similarly a person in every single interview pod that's like purely trying to address fit. And it's something that, many times the team is like, I have this need, I got to make this hire. This person has the right skill set, but they don't take kind of the head up and say, hey, is Miguel the right person for our organization? Right? Is he going to be a net positive, net negative, culturally from a personality perspective? So I'd say fit's a big one. I think early on, I wrote out the principles of the business. Again, I think there's a lot of amazing things to learn from the Amazonian way of running the business. And so, principles, leadership principles was something that I found to be something from a culture, from a behavioral norm, from a behavioral expectation perspective that we've built into comp, we've built into performance reviews. We really tried to ingrain these are the behavioral norms and expectations of someone that's going to be successful here. And these are things that, for me, I've just repeated almost ad nauseum over time around the importance of details, around the importance of competition, upon the importance of selfless collaboration. And so I'd say, whatever your objective is in the organization, whatever your kind of idiosyncrasies are, whatever your principles, whatever your beliefs are, write them down and really, really hold the team accountable against those over time. I found those to be a couple of the things I'd say that are unique to my leadership style.
And going back to knowing your superpower, knowing your strengths, have you always known this, or has it been a discovery process and also getting feedback from your team?
So I talked a little bit, I think, about calendar auditing, but I think the self-reflecting is really, really, really important for anyone, not just me, but even the leadership team. Hey, how is your team viewing you? Hey, how are our leadership team meetings or your team meetings effective? Hey, do you have attrition? Right? Do you have folks that are seeking to join the team? Right? I mean, I think these are things that you can be. No one's going to tell you these, right? You got to kind of study them, peel back the onion to really almost grade yourself. And I use the imagery of like remove yourself from a situation and be an external advisor to yourself of a situation. And so like remove the ego, remove the individual personal view and just say, hey, if you were an independent third party reflecting on a situation yourself, reflecting on this event, reflecting on, how you manage something, how would you have viewed it? And so I think like that internal auditing, that internal checking is something for me that, and hopefully my team would agree, something I've tried really, really, really hard to do to continue to kind of improve as a leader. I think, in sports, and I grew up playing sports like very, very, very intensely. There's like a feedback loop. One, there's a scoreboard. Two, maybe there's a scorebook. But there's a tighter, kind of feedback loop of success. Whereas in business, sometimes you have to, you gotta peel back the onion a couple of more layers to see what's working, what's not working. And I hope that that self-discovery is an enjoyable process, because certainly for those, we were like 26 when we started the business, very young. And so, this has really been a growth opportunity. And hopefully, every quarter, every 6 months, every 12 months, you're better than you were before. You're better for your team. You're better for your customers. You're more thoughtful. You're more empathetic. And so, I think some of that stuff only comes with reflecting on what you're good, what you're not good at, being vulnerable to do 360-degree reviews, being vulnerable to bring in external parties. I've had multiple external consulting and executive leader coaches do external reviews of the team, reviews from the leadership team. And so I think these are things that are, one, make you vulnerable, but two, I think provide an amazing foundation for growth.
Speaking of growth, Johnny, let's pivot a little bit to talk about M&A, something that you are familiar with. I think your most recent acquisition was Effective. Maybe tell us a bit about that, but specifically, maybe initially tell us about the M&A process, right? How did you run it? What did you learn? And then we can also talk about specifically the company.
So we've done 2 acquisitions to date. We acqui-hired another team as well. Each of them were squarely in the 3-year roadmap of what we were going to build to. And I don't remember where I read this, but I had written out a basically like 7-page memo for our board that said, I believe that this is a market that is going to be ripe for consolidation. I think there's going to be an opportunity to find really good teams that are working on specific problems that we can be a potential acquirer for. Here are effectively the 7 markets or verticals or product sets that you shouldn't be surprised when I bring you acquisitions that kind of fit in this bucket. And so I think that kind of set the foundation. I said, hey, here's our strategy. Here's our thesis. These are going to be areas where if I find the right team and it's the right time and it's the right price, don't be surprised that like I brought this out of nowhere because, some banker sent me a deck. This will be very thoughtful. Everything is going to kind of fit in this roadmap. And obviously, that document has kind of evolved over time. But our first acquisition of Burbix, we had built, the best kind of PII or passive verification service, and as we started to move internationally, as we started to do more and more in the government, as we started to move more and more in maybe higher secure, higher authentication use cases, we needed an ability to do both. And so, we had gone out, we tested maybe 9 different companies, and Burbix beat the socks off of all of them. So it was a very analytical process. It moved from like a, build, buy partner conversation into like, we should definitely go buy these guys. They've outperformed everyone. And so acquiring specific talent, specific skill sets. So heavily PII passive base. We talked a little bit about documents. Obviously, you need the ability to tie device to PII in a session, right? Is this Miguel's device? Is this Miguel's name, email, phone address, date of birth? How do I tie them together? So the acqui-hire team was really a mobile engineering team that was focused around device and behavioral. So again, very specific, very strategic, directly on the roadmap. And then, the effective team had the fortunate circumstance of knowing Ravi and Ritesh and Jonathan and Anupam for close to 10 years now. They had previously been the early team at Simility, which PayPal acquired. And we had a number of large fintechs, a number of big banks that had integrated Socure through Simility. And so we actually had first met them at one of the big card providers in Chicago. And yeah, just have had an immense respect for them. And I believe it's been mutual. And yeah, went out to market again. We started building what we needed to build. I started going to market and said, hey, I'm going to work with some investors. I'm going to work with, some of the analysts. I'm going to work with some of the consulting, put together an exhaustive list. I looked, I analyzed, I researched with the team, probably 55 companies that were floating around decisioning and orchestration and rule writing and model building and really honed it down and kind of narrowed it down to a couple. And yeah, it was just an incredible opportunity for them to accelerate commercial adoption of a best in class platform that had been enterprise grade from the beginning, given this is the third platform that they've built. From our side, we have 20 products where we have developed an ability to verify and risk grade every part of Miguel. We needed an ability to orchestrate a decision. And as more and more companies were looking for Socure to be that nucleus of all of their identity, risk and compliance and acquisition and growth decisions, it was really kind of a match made in heaven, where they brought a super scalable, well-architected, well-designed, large enterprise-ready platform. We brought close to 3,000 customers, 20 best-in-class products, this kind of horizontal data and intelligence layer that allows us to take products plus data plus software and combine it into one solution and bring 55, 60 third-party solutions that we can also distribute and help solve additional customer problems with. And so it's a long negotiation cycle. I think in many of these, right, you just got to find that like perfect sweet spot in terms of capital and ownership structure, and really just finding this like perfect kind of apex of time where the stars aligned. And yeah, the rest is history. We got the deal done late in Q4. Teams worked through the holidays to hit our very aggressive general availability, rebuilt the APIs, rebuilt the dashboard, rebuilt user access management, shipped 5 initial use cases. And yeah, from acquisition announcement to full general availability, less than 90 days, tremendous pace from both teams. Again, going back to fit, I spent a lot of hours, probably a couple of 100 hours with Ravi and Ritesh, the 2 co-founders, and really convincing them that together we basically could change the trajectory of each of our respective businesses. And through that, I was really confident in fit. I was really confident in the team. I was really confident in their team. And I just felt there was going to be this incredible integration that, yeah, I mean, I shared this with the board of our notes thus far. The integration has just been seamless. It's as if our team was on their team the entire time, their team was on our team the entire time, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And look, I think from an investor perspective, with your venture capital hat on, a big part, as we talked about calendar auditing, as we talked about leadership introspection and really understanding where you're great, where you're weak. Similarly, on the M&A side, we have scorecards where we actually look at, here's exactly what we said we were going to do. Here's the timeline we said we were going to do it on. And here's our scorecard and grading of ourselves. And so we've done that with each of these. We've done it periodically. And, it's been one of the things our board has said. It's amazing how many companies use M&A as a lever and then kind of just like wash out what was supposed to have happened. And they never go back and are like, here's what we said, here's the outcome. Here's what we said, here's the outcome. And yeah, that's something that my hope is, M&A is going to continue to be a strategic asset that we leverage. Certainly with a platform, we think this is going to be an opportunity here to really kind of create this nucleus and centralize a lot of identity and risk and compliance and growth decisions on Socure, which means there's a lot more capabilities that we're going to be able to deliver through that engine, both obviously organically through our building, through partnership, and then, hopefully in the future inorganically. And you really can't do that without the support of your investors and the support of your board. And so I think a really big part of this is, as you do it, going back and measuring and proving that you did what you said you were going to do.
Yeah, it sounds like you're very good about managing those expectations and avoiding surprises with your board, and I assume also your leadership team. Johnny, how have the last 2.5 years changed anything for you when it comes to the proliferation of AI tooling, or not really?
We've been training machine learning models for over a decade. I think the biggest initial acceleration that we saw, I'd say, across kind of 500 employees, is certainly in engineering. The acceleration of code development, the acceleration of technical documentation, the acceleration of migrating or upgrading different applications. I'd say that was like kind of the initial acceleration. I'd say in our products, we have visual language models running, we have small language models running, we have large language models running. I'd say for us, given the strength of Socure has always been in data science, has always been in AI machine learning. We've been early adopters for many years. It's embedded in platform, it's embedded in each of our products, it's embedded in feature engineering, it's embedded models, it's embedded in model explainability. And so, yeah, I think we more than most, again, many of our investors have said, Johnny, you guys have been really leading the charge in terms of how much you've adopted AI across the entire business. Yeah, for us, it's just a core tenet of contract reviews, of content creation, of ideation, of research. It's just an absolute core tenet of the business. And I think a longer episode, maybe we'll do a follow-up session just around, how does a traditional SaaS, obviously one that's been building predictive analytics and machine learning for many years, how do you basically retrofit the AI native model onto a 500 person business or larger, right? And so that's been a big wave for us, is like, how do you rethink entire processes from scratch? Where if it were two of us building billing, how would you do it? If there were two of us building support, what would that look like? Right. And so just, rethinking as small startup, obviously with a much larger team, but really thinking through, how do you apply this lens of the efficiency of Telegram, the efficiency of Gamma, the efficiency of Cursor, right? Where you're seeing millions to tens of millions to billions of ARR per employee, right? How do you retrofit that onto an organization? I mean, again, using the Amazonian, this is day one saying, It's like, if this were day one of us starting the business, right? How would we think about solving all these problems? Appreciate we have a team, appreciate we have additional tech stack, appreciate we have additional processes, but like really ensuring that the team is like continuously evaluating, hey, do we need this, or can we use like O3 Mini to do it? Right? Hey, do I need to use like, this consulting firm, or can I use deep research to do it? And so I'd say like that retraining again, I think is a thing and a muscle that Soku's trying to really hard to build. And I think it certainly will pay dividends because, of the distribution and scale of the business today. If we can achieve this, that's when you start to see 700 billion, $2 billion in revenue, which is really the direction that we're going in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know we're over time, but a couple more questions and I let you go. I saw that you posted, you volunteered to maybe help out the Doge team to figure out if you could, you can actually very quickly identify if there are any records of people who are dead that are claiming benefits or anything else. Maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, Socure's been hard at work at the state level. I think we're in 36 state agencies. We're in 3 federal agencies. We just, after many years, many millions, received FedRAMP authorization to service any federal agency. And so it's really kind of the highest level of security with the most sensitive asset, which is citizen data. And so many years of work going in here. Look, I think fraud, waste, and abuse means a lot of different things. Certainly, abuse is like people stealing money and just kind of abusing the system. And then fraud is certainly a major area that we spend, which is unfortunately the government. And in the worst example, we've seen agencies that are 70, 80% of all dollars being distributed. And some state unemployment agencies are going to fraudsters and are being stolen. Unfortunately, most of the budgets have something close to 10% of the total budget is leakage. Leakage is just fraud. So they're actually baking a very large amount of fraud into every budget. And so our hope across all agencies is we can move away from 10% leakage, right? Most fintechs and financial services are in 10%, 10 basis points, 12 basis points, 15 basis points, right? Not 1,000. And so, that's kind of a meta theme that we're working on. I'd say specific to some of Doge. Look, we know that the Social Security Administration's death master file is not the death master file, right? We've had to do a tremendous amount of work going to funeral homes, going to probate courts, going, to wills, going to and to get access to real-time death master deceased records. And so I'd say that's an easy thing. It is incredible that in the modern age, you still have agencies that are not even collecting the minimum amount of information that's required to verify. You have folks that are not checking, hey, have we seen 37 applications coming from the same device today? Right? And so there's a lot of just kind of systematic maturation that needs to take place at both the state and the federal level, where these folks are 15 years behind financial services and maybe 20 years behind fintech sometimes in technology and analytics in their approach to how do you ensure who the person is, the person's alive, it's the right person, their account hasn't been taken over before you move the amount of money that obviously many of these agencies are moving. And so, yeah, we're excited. Natural disasters, we do a lot of work, I'd say, with one of the large 3-letter agencies that distribute a lot of the money coming out post disaster. We've seen, unfortunately, with the LA wildfires, we've stopped in the last about 6 weeks over $3 billion of fraudulent loan applications. One agency, one attack in about 6 weeks, billions of dollars that we've prevented and being stolen. And so I'd say that the other thing that we're working with many of the agencies is to move away from this, hey, we're going to go collect $7 million that was stolen later, which is a big thing that happened with PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, is they were like, just push the money out. We'll go collect it that was stolen later. And we're trying really hard to get these agencies to think about prevention. Like, just don't send the money to the wrong person to start. And so, look, our hope is that, obviously, as we work to raise, $1 trillion in taxes, and certainly as Elon and the Doge team try to find $1 trillion in fraud, waste, and abuse, that Socure can be helpful. It'd be more helpful than we are already today, as we look to bring modern analytics, modern ways of verifying identities that have been best practice in the private sector, for the last 10 years. And it's really fun to be able to do, this civic duty that I think is a incredible moment of time, for us to make this transformation as a country. Really hopefully get the country back on the right foot in terms of a budget surplus. So we're excited to have Socure play our role here with Doge.
I mean, those are some wild stats, and you hear the saying how the future's already here is not evenly distributed, but like for these government agencies, and in some cases you say they're like 20 years behind. It's insane. I was going to ask you about the future, what you think is the future of identity, but it seems like a lot of your job is helping bring your clients to the present. But speaking of that, final question: what is the future of identity going to bring to the industry?
So I think it's so interesting in this oscillation of like thinking about 10 years versus 3 years. And I'd say in the short term, you're seeing biometrics becoming more normalized. You're seeing a larger move to standardization around how digital identity wallets should operate. I think as we look forward 10 years, 15 years, like, computers as we know it won't exist. Phones as we know it won't exist. And I think you're going to see a lot more wearables. I think you're going to see a lot more physical pieces of hardware that are enabling how identities are verified. I think you're going to have some form of tokenization that's going to allow the next version, the more consumer facing or more consumer friendly version of passkeys. I think some of the really interesting, again, as you think longer term, 15 years, 20 years, how do you use iris scanning? How do you use the next generation of what physical hardware looks like as this kind of tokenized representation of who you are? I think that the journey of how we get there involves partnerships with governments. I think some of the stuff you're seeing in the US around mobile driver's license, is probably going to be a 20-year rollout. I think we're about 20 years on the back of real IDs. But, some of the stuff that you're seeing with digital IDs in Europe, again, I think of the journey to like what this future tokenization look like. I don't know what the mobile phone is going to be in 20 years. My guess is it's some type of embedded or wearable or contact or, something that it looks different and feels different than the current phone. But we're kind of on this journey of moving from, maybe insecure forms of authentication, moving into more secure forms of digital identity verification. And then I think there's going to be some form of tokenized credential into this future device, probably over the next, 10, 15, 20 years.
Fascinating stuff. Johnny, I'm going to have to re-listen to this because there's a lot out there that you threw at us, but it's just all interesting. So thank you for joining. Really good stuff. And look forward to seeing you in person in the next conference where we cross paths.
Miguel, I appreciate it and keep doing great work. Big fan, big listener. So I really appreciate you having me on the show here today.
Thank you, Johnny.
The Fintech Leaders podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice.